Hoş geldiniz. İyi akşamlar.
Welcome and good evening. Welcome to our panel on practices of dealing with difficult pasts, creative memory works. Before I introduce our speakers, I will have a short introduction. The Hrant Foundation is organizing these series of panels on dealing with difficult pasts. We will have 3 different speakers who will talk about their projects, and I will try to moderate this session, and then we will open the platform for questions. Now I'll switch to English.
All right. You're okay with the title? Okay. Linda Norris is from the International Coalition of Sites of Conscience. She is the co-author of Creativity in Museum Practice, and she blogs at the Catalog Museum. She is the Global Networks Program Director, leading the coalition's work in Asia, Africa, Russia, Latin America, and the Caribbean, Europe, the list goes on. And she helps to build the capacity of the members of the coalition through trainings and workshops and cross-regional exchanges and advocacy campaigns. And to my right is Amina Krvavac. I think I still got the name right, okay. And she's from the War Childhood Museum, and this museum focuses on war childhood experiences as a tool for peace building. She's interested in museums as spaces for social action and drivers of change. Amina creates exhibitions and workshops that support open and conscious dialogue. She's focused on working to shift the perception of children not as passive victims, but as empowered survivors and as active, creative, social agents. And on my left is Katia Chornik from Captive Songs. This project is about collecting and archiving music histories from political detention centers in Pinochet's Chile. She's an ethnographer and a cultural historian. She works for the Surrey County Council also as part of the Insight and Innovations Qualitative Research Team. Current projects include researching the Council's support for unaccompanied asylum-seeking children and implementing new ethics protocols for Council research. So welcome to all of you, and I'm just going to give it over to Linda to get started with her presentation.
Okay, thank you. I'm really thrilled to be here, so thank you as it opens up. Okay, which one do I have to press now?
Actually, this one.
Okay. Thank you all for your patience with my lack of technology. I really want to thank the Hrant Foundation for having all of us and showing us such generous hospitality, as well as an opportunity to learn about the work of the foundation. So I'm really happy to be here. I know all of us are. Today, I just want to introduce a little bit about the work of the International Coalition of Sites of Conscience and about the creative memory work of some of our members around the world. So to begin with, kind of who are we? We're almost done being a teenager as an organization. We were founded 19 years ago when a visionary founding director of the Lower East Side Tenement Museum in New York just thought that there might be other museums in the world also interested in social justice. Because it was the olden days, she sent out faxes. She sent out about 50 faxes. She found museum fax numbers and sent them out to museums around the world. And 7 organizations responded, including Terezin in the Czech Republic, Via Grimaldi in Argentina, Perm 36, the Gulag Museum in Russia, the Workhouse in the UK, and Maison des Sclaves in Dakar, Senegal. So a group of people got together and founded the coalition. They thought there might be a place for not a straight museum organization. I come from the world of museum work, and there are lots of museum organizations out there. But their goal was really to find a place for museums interested in social justice. And so our founder, Ruth Abrams, said at one point, the coalition is working toward the day when historic sites everywhere become places of engagement where visitors participate in finding solutions to enduring social, economic, and political issues. Such is the power of history. Our challenge is to harness that power to improve the world. So now we are the only global network of historic sites, museums, and memory initiatives that can connect past struggles to today's movements for human rights. And it's that past to present and future that's a really important connection. So what's the network part? What does that mean now, 19 years on? From those 7 initial founders, we are now 250 museums, historic sites, and memory initiatives around the world in 60 countries. So we are many and growing all the time. It's Hrant Dink Foundation is a member, Katia's organization is a member, and Amina's organization will soon be joining us. So it's an amazing network. From the tomb of Askia in Mali, built in 1495 and recently under attack by extremists, that's one of our newest members, to plantations in the American South, attempting to grapple with issues of enslaved people, to a tea workers plantation museum in Sri Lanka. Our members share 4 key characteristics in their work. First, they interpret history through sight. This is the Wing Luke Museum of the Asian American Experience in Seattle, in the USA. It might be a physical site, like this boarding house. It might be, in some cases, sites that our members cannot yet have access to. Many of our members in the Middle East and North Africa are concerned about places that are not accessible to them right now. You'll hear about Katia's work with sites that are far away from her, but still a central part of their work, really place-based. So we think of sites as they might be a single building, such as the Hrant Dink site, the Argos office. It might be a city, or more broadly, it might be an entire country. We take a broad view of that. And although many of our museums, many of our sites hold museum collections, hold objects, have archives, that's a vital part of our work, but we're not just about collecting and preserving. Our members engage the public in public programs that stimulate dialogue on pressing social issues. Those issues, like our sites, are equally wide-ranging. Contemporary slavery, mass incarceration, genocide, the rule of law. It's critical to us in every part of work we do and every part of the work our members do that the people affected, victims, survivors, activists, all have strong voices in developing the programs, exhibits, and everything else that our members do to share their story. So we want those people who are directly involved, right, those activists and survivors and victims, to have involvement in telling their story. But we also, our members share opportunities for public involvement and positive action on the issues raised at the site. We are not just, our members are not just about telling you facts about something happened here. That's not enough for us. We want to open up dialogue around the issues that any of our site raises. So whether it's the legacy of genocide in Cambodia at the Tulsang Genocide Museum and what that means in an increasing rise of authoritarianism, you know, that finding a place for contemporary dialogue is critical to our work. And finally, to use a site I got to see in person today, a site of conscience is any memorial, museum, memory initiative, non-governmental organization, sometimes a governmental organization, whose job is promote justice and a universal culture of human rights. That's really at the heart of what we do, because it's through this work that we can build a better world together. So how do we work? We work regionally, as you just heard. We have regional networks. We have annual or biannual meetings to share ideas and best practices, to consider ways to strengthen the network, and to learn specifically from visits to sites. We have a couple global thematic working groups that we're just beginning to think about, well, what do issues of incarceration mean when we think about Tuol Sleng in Cambodia, Eastern State Penitentiary in Philadelphia, you know, all different sites around the world, to begin to think about, well, what does that mean? How do we think about that together? We also have an immigration and migration working group and an environmental justice working group. So in all of those, we're beginning to explore how to make our connections not just regional, but to also make them more global in terms of thinking together about those issues. We have 2 other programs that I'm going to talk about global networks more, but we have 2 other programs I should totally mention. One is our Global Initiative for Truth, Justice, and Reconciliation. We had a 8-member consortium that's really looking at truth and reconciliation work in all kinds of ways in immediate post-conflict countries. Colombia, Sri Lanka, Afghanistan, all kinds of places. So that work involves everything from advocacy work to memory work. You'll see a little bit of it later. So it's really, really looking at immediate post-conflict societies. And then methodology and practice is our arm that mostly in the United States does training and professional development for organizations. So those are the other parts of our 15-person staff. As you can see, you know, collaboration is a really important part of building creative responses to the issues we think about. So I want to highlight two of our current projects as a way of exploring a little bit about what we do. This is a pilot version of a digital mapping project in our MENA region. 8 of our members in the MENA region, as I said, many of whom do not have access. You know, our Syrian members are not working in Syria. They are somewhere else, for instance. Got together and we've produced a digital map of sites of detention and torture in the Middle East. And it's really innovative for a couple of reasons. One, it's really the first project that has looked at those detention and torture issues across the region more broadly. The pilot version just kind of introduces you to the sites and locates them. In our next phase, we'll be activating each of these sites more with regional context, with testimonies, with other kinds of information. But it's a project all of our members in that region are working on together. In the US, Brown versus Board of Education to Ferguson is about fostering dialogue on education, incarceration, and civil rights. One of the most long-standing issues in the US is the education inequity faced by students of color. So this project has included a youth engagement summit that brought young people, some of our members in the US, and activists together to plan how to do back in their home communities events really engaging audiences of all different types in dialogue. We also produce our front page dialogues, which use what we call the arc of dialogue. These front page dialogues, actually, our goal is to produce them quickly as topics arise. There are dialogues on Charlie Hebdo shooting, the Paris Climate Agreement, the Women's March in Washington, and most recently, guns in America, which, as you know, is, you know, a really challenging issue for Americans. Our next front page will actually focus more directly on an issue of concern to our non-US members. So, you know, the range of topics is great, from rising authoritarianism to xenophobia. So those are, you know, these are another way to give our members tools to have conversations in their own communities. But this is the best part when I talk about the work that our members do. Honestly, this is, so this is to share some creative interventions around memory work done by some of our members, some sites of conscience. This image is from the Krang Tra Chan killing field, about 3 hours drive outside Phnom Penh. I got a chance to visit a couple weeks ago, so, you know, our member, Youth for Peace, has made the killing field into a site of conscience managed by villagers nearby. And these wall paintings, actually made by victims and survivors, help tell the story of the site and their individual experiences. And it's very, that's just the outside of a building, so you just encounter these kind of as you visit the site. Act for the Disappeared in Lebanon is a site of conscience without a site. It was created in 2010 as an organization by a group of citizens from all religious denominations and not affiliated with any political party, but they want to clarify the fate of all those who went missing in Lebanon since 1975 due to political violence. That's lots of people. They estimate, according to a police report, 17,415 persons. They take their name literally, about acting for the disappeared. So this exhibition, with just photographs of someone who's disappeared and some biographical information, pops up all over Beirut in city squares. And so in an evening, in kind of a really powerful, beautiful way, those people disappeared live again once in those squares. We also offer small project support grants to members, and this is a project by Kade Karuna, another Cambodian member. They are creating a theater program with the goal of ending the silence around forced marriage under the Khmer Rouge. The first phase was this exhibition in which you heard testimonies. The next phase is actually a theater performance piece that will be traveling around, and particularly to rural areas where often these kinds of conversations are not held and are not comfortable, and the idea is through a theater piece, opening up that conversation. One of my favorite US museums is the Oakland Museum of California, who does a lot of great exhibitions. As you can see, this is an exhibition that gives visitors a chance to tell city officials what they think. So it's a really open-ended exhibition with the goal of sharing with elected officials the voices of a city's citizens. But many of our sites are actually physical places. And this is, I think, one of the most unusual ones. It's the National Stadium in Chile. It was used as a detention center, but it's still a sports stadium. You still go see football games, right? Katia's been. I have not. But they have chosen to preserve one kind of set of bleachers as a memorial to those people who were detained there. And I find it so interesting that in the midst of, I'm sure, incredibly enthusiastic football, maybe not as enthusiastic as the other night that we heard when we first got here, but incredibly enthusiastic football. This still, right, what happened still has a place in everyday life. It's possible to remind people on a regular basis. I think it's a really powerful, interesting site. Interestingly, a number of our members are beginning to look at virtual reality as a tool for engaging people in the stories of their site. This is the Parramatta Female Factory, kind of a women's prison in Australia. And they have done, it's not possible for everyone to visit. They have done a virtual reality experience that they hold off-site with the voices of victims and survivors. Personally, I'm still trying to figure out what I think about virtual reality and the issues it raises around empathy and around just about how people view it in different kinds of ways. So we're really interested that a number of our members are kind of experimenting. But it doesn't have to be high tech at all. Zulkrat, one of our new members who's been here, yes, to speak, has a political games challenge every year. And a couple of our other members are also using board games as tools to really open up conversations about issues in their community. Sometimes even collecting requires creative efforts. This is Voices from the Vault, a project of diversity challenges, one of our members from Northern Ireland. Part of what's happened is collecting stories from police or IRA paramilitaries on either side of that, that conflict is incredibly difficult for all kinds of reasons, right? People are not interested in speaking. But Diversity and Challenges has embarked on a storytelling project that has really involved building trust between both groups of police and military officials, and that they have, from that process of building trust and collecting those stories, they have also begun to do walking tours with people from both sides together, and are working on turning it into a performance as well. This is a project in Antwerp, Belgium, from the Red Star Line Museum, which is the immigration museum. The Red Star Line was a place where thousands and thousands and thousands of Europeans, mostly Eastern Europeans, immigrated to the New World. But of course, Antwerp is also a place of immigrants now in Antwerp. So the Safe Harbor Project, I don't know if you can tell, they're actually in a little van. So the museum has a van, goes to different parts of Amsterdam, and it collects stories about your first 5 in Antwerp, about your first 5 years in the community. But then they turn those stories into paper boats that then will be part of a large exhibit. So everyone's story is not only collected as a story, but becomes a work of art as well. These are memory boxes that the Afghanistan Human Rights and Democracy Organization has created. They decided that there needed to be a place to collect memories and feelings and to represent the entirety of victims' lives, right? To not just have a plaque or a name. They wanted to represent more about victims and to give family members a way to really process and collect that together. So now at these boxes, which are really just boxes, they have collected more than 200 of them, mostly by women, that represent family members that have been lost to the wars in Afghanistan. It's really a way for the ordinary people of Afghanistan to reclaim their stories, particularly in the face of lots of other kinds of narratives. Tika, one of our members in Kenya, does a lot of community mural painting, and one of them in a community called Vivawandandi, I'm going to hope I got that right, include one about community resources in which a big fish and a little fish face off against the big fish to compete for local resources like land, food, water, and justice. So there are so many different ways that people can choose to represent not just the past, but current issues as well. This is, and I'm going to talk a little bit more tomorrow if anyone's coming to the workshop, one of our transitional justice projects, our body mapping workshops, which are really, one of the things that's interesting is to begin to think about nonverbal tools as ways to work towards reconciliation. So this body mapping and other kinds of programs bring relief to victims by providing them with places to share their experiences, acknowledge the experiences of others, and to build empathy among different groups of survivors. In this, I had a chance to observe this workshop in Sri Lanka, and there were people from all sides of the conflict in Sri Lanka, 20 women, and the process by which you discover that if your husband was a Tamil tiger and you lost him, or your husband was a police sergeant, the loss is still loss. And watching people discover that together seems so important. This is another project from another, kind of textile project. It's kind of interesting, which is the Advocacy Quilting Project from the National Network of Families of the Missing and Disappeared in Nepal, another one of our members. They're training women in embroidery, giving them both a marketable skill and a platform for advocating for their missing loved ones. So it does a couple of different things. This really interesting project does a couple of different things. One, it gives women a platform from which to honor the memory of their disappeared husbands and to speak about the ongoing injustice of being denied the truth. Livelihood, it trains women in a marketable skill that helps them earn a sustainable income. And I think that process, we're beginning to think a little bit more about what it means. People need to live, they need to make a living, and how can truth, justice, and reconciliation processes help with that as well? I think it's something we're just beginning to think about. And because they work together, this is a communal project and kind of continues to provide support. So I want to end with these young men. They're really young men. Every time I visit a site of conscience, and this is from Tolslang Genocide Museum in Cambodia, almost always there are photographs of victims, right? They're always photographs, and I'm always drawn to them. And I, in a way, find these. I was telling Amina that I always get like kind of weirdly emotional when I talk about some of these things. So I will be. Right, what you imagine are, these lives cut short. Our goal at the coalition is to create a more just world. So we're not looking at these, we're looking at photographs of children and grandchildren of people like this. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda.
This is on? Yes. Hello, everybody. As you can see, and as I was introduced, I'm Amina. I am from the War Childhood Museum, from Sarajevo, from Bosnia and Herzegovina. And I'm really happy to be here today to share with you a bit of what we do with the museum and to maybe, I mean, not maybe, certainly to learn a lot about, I meant maybe to learn something from you that I'm sure many of you are involved in interesting initiatives, and certainly to learn a lot from other participants in the panel. So before I start with telling you more about the museum itself, I would like to tell you something about the War Childhood Project, which is the project from which the museum was born. So War Childhood Project was initiated by my colleague, Jasmin Kohalilovic. He was a child during the war in Sarajevo. He was a 5-year-old boy, and he once he was adult, he wanted to do something meaningful with this experience. So he lived under the siege for years, and he thought that the way this difficult past and childhood in war was dealt with, even globally, was not like the most adequate way, because he was thinking, okay, this really lacks the very important part of the puzzle, which is the perspective of children on war, which is, yeah, we will talk about it a bit later, because this is what we tackle at the museum. So he started actually with this very simple online call. He launched with this question: what was a war childhood for you? So his idea was to gather short testimonies of all those who were children in the war in the 90s, actually in Sarajevo at the time, and to hear in a very short form of a tweet, 160 characters, to answer this question. And a bit surprisingly, so many people, like thousands of people from 35 different states in the world, because so many years after, 20 years after, they were like scattered around the world, and they started sending him their memories and saying like what was a war childhood for them. Of course, it was very difficult sometimes to put everything in 160 characters, but just to give you an idea, how were these testimonies? I will let you read this. This is another one. So he, initially he thought that this would be just a couple of months of work, but in the end it was 3 years actually, and he gathered all these short testimonies in a book, which looks like this. So a mosaic of all these short testimonies was gathered together, and the book was published in 2013, and it was later on translated in different languages, in German, Japanese. This is the promotion of, the book was launched in Sarajevo, and you can see, I'm showing you this picture just for you to understand how important this idea was, that people really rarely had a chance to speak about their childhood in war. And with this book, with this, what Jasminko was doing, with this project, they finally felt like this is a way where we can somehow gather and share our stories. This is the, again, launch in the parliament in Brussels. And so this was just an introduction to tell you that how it evolved. So while he worked on a book, he started seeing that there is a need in society, that there is a need to have a place where people would come and share their stories. But most importantly, he noticed that many people were eager to bring an object while they would meet him to share their short testimony. They would also bring an object that would illustrate what was their most evocative, or the memory that stayed with them for many years. And in 2015, he said, okay, I think it would be really, really interesting and useful if we would manage to create a museum where we would actually gather all these objects that I've seen that people still keep and that they are eager to share. And of course, it would be a place where all these valuable objects would be preserved. So this is the idea, this is how he came up with the idea to create the museum, and why was one of the first people who joined them in this endeavor. So together we started first developing the methodology for creating the collection of, at the time, Future Museum. And of course this was, it brought many challenges along. So it was just a lot of enthusiasm and hard work, and so we had very clear ideas, and I would say a lot of expertise also from people who volunteered their time to help us build up the methodology and later on to create a collection. But of course we lacked the funds, we did not have physical space. One of the biggest challenges at the time when we just started creating the collection was like, how do you build the credibility? Like, you are just a group of people who want to do something, but like you need to build this trust. You need, because people were actually donating some of their most cherished objects to the museum that was still in the making. So we were very proud that this went very well, and in less than 2 years we collected almost 4,000 personal objects and accompanying stories, and we recorded, because we were also part of our collection, our audio-video testimonies. We also collected, recorded 150 hours of oral history testimonies. So in these testimonies, survivors, those who were children during the war in the 90s, narrate their personal experiences. They touch upon many different aspects. So the museum works on its, all our activities can be somehow divided into these 3 main categories. So, as I already mentioned, in creation and expansion of our collection, it's a research phase. So we collect personal items, photographs, documents. We, as I said, film audio and video testimonies. And then we have the exhibition where we exhibit what we collected and what is in our collection. So we have a permanent exhibition now in Sarajevo. And it took us many months we were struggling to get the space. I will tackle that a bit later. Why was this such a challenge? And so now we have, as of January 2017, we have a space and a permanent exhibition in Sarajevo. We also have had a couple of traveling exhibitions, and we exhibit a lot of our materials via different social media channels. And our third very important aspect of work are educational activities. So we try to talk about war childhood as a very multi-layered and complex experience, and we travel around schools, and we also host school groups at the museum premises and we developed some educational workshops for children. So our idea is really to somehow contribute to the paradigm shift where usually if you watch, I don't know, news or read newspapers or even visit many exhibitions and just look at the public discourse on children and armed conflict, it's very often reduced to victimhood only. So as most of us who are involved with the War Childhood Museum were having this experience on ourselves where we were children in war, we thought, and also through the research that we conducted, that it is really not that simple. So there are so many different aspects that are neglected when we talk about children affected by war. So there is something that is somehow helping us to shift from this perception of being a helpless victim to be portrayed and seen as empowered survivor. And this is, I believe, a strong thing about the War Childhood Museum. So all the stories and the way we approach when we talk to children about the war childhood are, we tell the stories with a lot of dignity. So we don't put pictures, as you mentioned, of just poor children that are hungry and dirty and in need. Of course, our goal is far from somehow minimizing the impact that wars have on children. They certainly do have many negative consequences, but it's also that children do manage to find coping mechanisms. They do have something we refer to resilience and creativity, imagination, and I can tell you that many of us do stay like functional, behaved adults. It's not necessarily that we will end up as being like dysfunctional people with PTSD, which is what you always read about when you think about children in war. So all our exhibitions are designed in a way that we have all these different aspects. So we would have part of the exhibition dedicated to play, part of the exhibition dedicated, of course, to personal loss and trauma, which is inevitable, but we would also have part of the exhibition that speaks about the creativity of children to recreate safe spaces, toys they didn't bring along when they had to flee from home, for example. And so many different aspects are put together in a balanced way so that they don't also traumatize those who visit the museum. And yeah, this would be like briefly about our main activities. And this is interesting when I mentioned the challenges that we were facing in the initial phase. So we had to work in local bars, in shopping malls, and so we were just meeting people, and we would gather. This is how we started creating the collection. So I thought that it would be interesting to share with you. And these are some of the objects from the collection of the museum, just to illustrate what I said earlier on. For instance, you see the rhythmic gymnastics. Do you see this? I don't have anything to point out. Yeah, this one. So this is a story. A girl from Sarajevo decided to practice rhythmic gymnastics every day in a city under the siege. So she was just determined to become very good at this. So she was going to trainings under sniper and shelling, and she was influencing the behavior of her parents and her trainers. So they all had to help her make it to the world championship in the end. So it's really, it is a story about the strength and resilience, I think, that is really illustrating it well. These are some of the other objects just for you to, I will not go, I don't think I have time to tell you all the stories, but just for you to see what are some of the objects. So all of them are exhibited with a very short personal story that is saying why is this particular object important to that particular person. So the museum and the exhibition is based, of course, on personal narratives. These are just images of people narrating their stories, and this is our permanent exhibition in Sarajevo that I mentioned. So we, I mentioned earlier on that I will tackle a bit this issue, why was it so difficult to find a physical space for the museum? So we really decided that it was about a time to start talking about difficult past in a constructive way. So we thought that if we start speaking about difficult past in Bosnia and Herzegovina from the perspective that is not focusing on who did what and who's guilty for what, because this is the job of the International Court, I would say, and it is very clear what happened. But because, so the idea was that we start finding common grounds, a platform where everybody can come and tell their stories. And particularly because we are focusing our work on the experiences of children, it somehow easily transcends would be the right word, this national, ethno-national division in a society, because it's easier for all sides to somehow accept that this was the experience of a child. So it isn't as politicized and difficult to accept in a way. So we believe that providing such a platform for post-conflict society is really a suitable basis for reconciliation, for constructive dialogue, because no matter what your ethnic religious affiliation is, you can still come and tell us your war childhood personal story, and we will be there to share your story, to exchange stories of others with whoever wants to participate, and we really believe that this somehow contributes to the healing of the person who comes and participates in a project, because many of our participants actually told us that they had no chance to share their story before. So there was a girl who said, okay, I've been carrying this ID card in my wallet for 20 years, and I never thought that I would decide to give this to someone, and I never actually talk about this experience before, but now I feel like I left part of my burden, and she gave us this ID card of her brother who was killed during the war. So it's really a tool that helps people heal and face their past, and of course if all of us manage to face our own past, we are functioning better as an individual, and then like as individuals in society at large gets to be better, let's say. This is what we believe in. And yeah, I think I would just like to say that at the end of our first year of operation as a museum, we got the best birthday present ever. So we were awarded the Council of Europe Museum Prize for 2018 for promotion of European values, human rights, children's rights, because we provide children with the voice to share their story, with the possibility to share their stories. And so this was really a confirmation for us that we were doing the right job, that we were on the right track also. And we were told that... So this, and also coincidentally, we had a volunteer at the museum who came from Syria. And he is somebody who just completed his master's in England on conflict studies. And so he was somebody who had a lot of experience working with refugees from Syria, and somehow, so the award from the Council of Europe, his presence, it made us start thinking maybe it's time for us to somehow do something also about children that are currently affected by wars, for example, Syrian war, and he was our volunteer. He had a lot of contacts with Syrian refugee children all around the world. So we actually started, together with him, developing partnerships with organizations that work in the field with Syrian refugee children, and started documenting their stories. And we are now producing an exhibition on the Syrian child refugees' experiences. And this is, it brought new challenges. It was very different than what we did before, because before we were working in a post-conflict society with adults who were once children in war, but now we started working with children who are affected by war at this moment. And I have to say, I approached this task, and we started working in Lebanon first. And when we started doing this, I was really, really horrified, I have to say. Like, what will I do? I was flying to Lebanon, I remember it. And then I was thinking, like, but how will I approach to a Syrian child who has no house or clothes or school or electricity, water, food, and tell him, hello, I come from a museum, I would like to document your story. I was like, this is not going to be easy. Of course, our partners in the field had played a crucial role in this, because this is why we partnered with them, because they were like natural contact. These children were in touch with these organizations on a daily basis. They were their social workers or teachers or psychologists or activists. So they helped us. They facilitated our arrival in different camps in Lebanon. And I really learned there that it is important what we do, even from their perspective, because as soon as I started talking to the first Syrian family, my fears were kind of pushed away, because they were really, really interested and grateful that there is somebody coming from a faraway, small, little museum in a country who's interested in sharing their stories. Because here our goal was different. It wasn't to contribute to reconciliation, but to raise awareness about how children live because of different armed conflicts, and to ask them how would they want us to help, let's say, I mean us as humanity, if there was something that these actions aiming at children are the ways that these could be improved. But most importantly, one of the girls who learned that I was her age when the war happened in Bosnia told me, like, wow, I really feel like after meeting you and the team that there is hope for us also, that one day we will be able to graduate, to have job, to do something meaningful. So it was kind of a hope for her that if you are a child in a war, there is a better tomorrow. And this was like completely new dimension, and I was really, really proud and happy that we decided to engage in this part as well. I think that would be, yeah. I see that I've reached the time, I'm sorry.
No, thank you. Hello, can you hear me? I second my two colleagues in thanking the foundation and expressing how happy I am to be here sharing thoughts with you. So, I've been asked to provide a summary of the historical event relating to my project, assuming that not many of you may be familiar with the Pinochet regime. Augusto Pinochet came to power through a CIA-sponsored coup on the 11th of September 1973, overthrowing the socialist president Salvador Allende. Okay, is it better? Pinochet subordinated civil, political, and personal rights to the state. There was a permanent state of siege. Opposition parties and many local, regional, and national organizations were banned. The military exerted total control of unions, the education system, and the media. There were massive dismissals, strike actions were banned, and military discipline was imposed in workplace and schools. With the excuse of the internal enemy, Pinochet established over 1,000 detention centers throughout the country to hold approximately 40,000 political prisoners. Torture was a central pillar in these centers, where thousands were killed, their bodies disappeared. Mounting international pressure and violent protests forced Pinochet to hold a referendum in 1988 to decide whether he would continue in power. He lost, and therefore democratic elections were held the following year. In October 1998, Pinochet traveled to London, where he was arrested by the Metropolitan Police after an international warrant was issued for extradition to Spain, indicting him for human rights violations. The detention of Pinochet in a foreign country for crimes against humanity without a warrant or request for extradition from his own country is considered a turning point in international law since the Nuremberg trials of Nazi war criminals. After 503 days under arrest, Tony Blair's government released Pinochet on the grounds of alleged fragile health. He died in Chile in 2006 without having served a day in prison. Two national truth commissions were set up in Chile in the 1990s and 2000s to investigate human rights violations during the dictatorship. Thousands of testimonies were collected from victims and perpetrators and used to inform reports and reparation policies. Yet the original testimonies and the identities of testimony givers are still secret despite numerous campaigns to make this information available to the public. It is also prohibited to access the archives of the military, of the police, and of Colonia Dignidad, a torture and extermination center in the south of Chile run by former Nazis in collaboration with Pinochet's secret police. With the possibility of accessing these records being denied, and with the number of survivors diminishing fast, there is an urgent need to collect and preserve testimonial materials relating to the dictatorship. The singer-songwriter Victor Jara was a key and very well-known figure in the pan-Latin American culture and political movement known as New Song, or Nueva Canción in Spanish. Days after Pinochet's coup, during his political imprisonment at the Chile Stadium in Santiago, that's a different stadium, the one Linda mentioned, Victor Jara suffered trait-specific torture. He was reportedly ordered to play the guitar after having his wrists broken by his captors. Shortly before his execution, Victor Jara left a moving testimony of his captivity through an entitled poem that reads, and I quote, "There are 5,000 of us here in this small part of the city. How much humanity exposed to hunger, cold, panic, pain, moral pressure, terror, and insanity." The poem became well known after being smuggled to the UK, where his British widow had fled to. It was later set to music by the Chilean musician Isabel Parra, who during her exile sang it worldwide as part of campaigns in defense of human rights. Victor Jara's captivity experience has been honored by many others. The work done by musicians such as Peter Gabriel, Sting, the bands The Clash, and Simple Minds, to name a few, reinterpreting and composing new pieces inspired by Victor Jara, is evidence of the global relevance of the links between music, cultural memory, human rights, testimonies, and commemoration. Apart from Victor Jara, many others held in political detention centers had contact with music, be actively or passively. For inmates, music was a source of hope, resistance, resilience, solidarity, and entertainment. They would often respond to the regime's brutality by singing and playing or listening to music, proving the assertion of the British anthropologist John Blacking that, and I quote, "remarkable cultural developments can take place in societies in which man's humanity is progressively abused, restricted, and disregarded." Agents of the dictatorship employed music to dominate and provoke prisoners as a form of indoctrination, punishment, and torture. Music employed as a form of torture in Chile has appeared more widespread than expected, closely resembling practices of the US and the UK intelligence agencies. Despite acknowledging resulting damage, ex-prisoners' difficulty to class these as human rights violations is directly influenced by limited definitions used by governmental truth commissions, and by the fact that torture was legally not a crime in Chile until 2016. It didn't appear in the penal code. Perpetrators were also engaged in musical activity. While the expected pattern of opposition between their musicality and that of the victims is confirmed, their relationships with music are more complex and in some way mirroring those of the victims. Music is often used in current-day commemorative initiatives concerning the legacy of the Pinochet regime. Music's role is significant in mitigating long-term trauma and transmitting memories to younger generations, who often highlight iconic victim musicians such as Victor Jara, who you saw just now, recording their legacy and adapting it to contemporary socio-political issues. I've been working on the topic of music in centers for political detention for about a decade, on and off. My research has found evidence of music activity in 30 political detention centers, mostly through collecting testimonies from victims and perpetrators, covering all levels of political imprisonment, from secret torture chambers to concentration camps and prisons. Several contributors to my research have stated that they have never shared their experiences of political imprisonment and torture before. I would argue that remembering through music, possibly the most subjective and emotional cultural form, effectively enables victims to establish relationships with difficult experiences, providing them with an accessible tool to address these. Music thus acts as a catalyst for facilitating, engaging with, and contributing to memory processes, opening up previously closed spaces. Collecting testimonies has been a priority task for me, given that over 50% of survivors have already died, and many are very ill. Furthermore, substantial numbers of ex-political prisoners are scattered around the world, and conducting in-depth interviews is only possible with a very limited number of people. To speed up the collecting process, I created and have directed and edited the digital archive Cantos, Cautivos, or Captive Songs, launched in 2015 and developed in collaboration with the Museum of Memory and Human Rights in Chile. It was originally available in Spanish language, but since 2016, the entire content of the archive is also available in English. The archive currently has over 130 testimonies, of which approximately 30% refer to songs partially or fully written in detention. Other testimonies refer to performance and listening experiences, and of course there are many testimonies in which these three categories overlap. Over 50% of testimonies have been crowdsourced online, and I'm going to show you later. A wide range of music genres from different periods is represented, from Renaissance madrigals to 1970s pop. There is also a very international repertoire of songs, and I'm going to name some of the countries represented in alphabetical order. Argentina, Bolivia, Chile, of course, Ecuador, Germany, Italy, Mexico, Peru, Spain, the Ukraine, United Kingdom, the United States, Uruguay, and Venezuela, and Serbia as well. I'm sorry there is no Turkey, but Serbia is probably the closest. So I'm going to show you an example later. Whilst the majority of testimonies are from ex-political prisoners, some are voiced by their descendants, and we have a fair number of testimonies written by now adults, then children who would go and visit the parents in the centers where the visits were allowed. And so they are, as in the Sarajevo project, remembering their experiences as children, but now as adults. Among the archive's most unique materials are recordings by detainees at the Chacabuco concentration camp in the Atacama Desert, and testimonies relating to Dawson Island concentration camp at the southern tip of Patagonia. And we have two other types of recordings, some when the testimony is about a performance of pre-existing songs, and we simply hang on to YouTube videos freely available, but we also have a fair number of recordings which are reconstructions of pieces originally written in detention that had never been, they were never recorded. So I'm going to show you the archive. Right, so I'm going to be... Okay. I'm going to be switching from the current version, this is the current version, to a new website that is going to be available very, very soon. It's the same URL. And I should say on that table outside there are some leaflets if you want to take one. So this, I need to apologize. I wish I could have shown you the new version fully, but we still have a few technical blips that we need to sort out. So this is the front page of the new website that will be available in a few weeks. A bit like Amina's museum is one story, one song, one story. So all testimonies are sorted by the name of the title of the song that is the core of the testimony. So I'm going to pick this one, which is from the concentration camp in the Atacama Desert. So this is a partially original song. The melody is pre-existing, and the lyrics are totally new. And here we have a testimony by one of the authors of that song. So it's quite long. I'm afraid I won't have the time to read it to you, but I'm going to play the song. And one of the special thing about this recording is that it's an original recording made in a clandestine way at the time. So the quality of it is not the best, as you can imagine, but the historical value is incredible. So I'm going to play this recording, and I'm going to project a translation of the lyrics so you can follow it. Oops. Is it working?
Folclor de Chacabuco.
Oh.
Volando en ti mucho atraso.
to do it gradually, but so very quickly, I'm sorry I had to cut it, but very quickly. Oh, it's black. If possible, yeah. I just wanted to show you very, very quickly how to browse the archive. I'm going to show the new version, which is going to be available very, very soon. So you can search by region. So if you click on any region, you will find all the testimonies relating to that particular region. You can also search by detention center. It's all tagged here. By detention center, then you'll get the list. You can search by author of the testimony and also by musical pieces alphabetically and by order of arrival. And there is also a general search box that picks anything, any term, any name. Yeah, so I finish with an invitation for you to explore the archive. Thank you very much. I'm sorry, Katia, to have cut you short, but there's so much to explore in the archive. I recommend everyone to spend some time there. I'm sure the audience has a lot of burning questions, as do I, but so I'm going to maybe ask you a couple of questions and then we can open it up to the audience to go further into. The first thing I wanted to ask was to perhaps go into a little bit of the terminology that all of you started using in your talks about both in terms of like narrating and historicizing and telling stories, and this is obviously something that's central to all your work. And there's obviously a drive to, when you're collecting and exhibiting and archiving, there's a drive to think about improving a society and a community, and there's definitely a sense of community. So I was wondering how we could start thinking about consolidating the idea of improvement with historicization and the terms. I know that we have different versions of these terms, but reconciliation and reparation and acknowledging the past and trauma and disaster. So perhaps we could start by delving into some of these really large things. I know that
so I'll start. Yeah, those are big questions that you've given us. I think it's impossible you can't erase memory, right? I mean, that's what it is. What happens is what happened. One of the things that Coalition works with is the definition that I believe originally came out of the South African Truth Commission about 4 truths. Mm-hmm. A personal lived truth, a forensic truth, a societal truth, which interestingly sometimes is wrong, right? There was a point that in the US, the societal truth was that enslaving people was okay. So that is very interesting how those societal truths sometimes wrong. But then that 4th truth is really the never again truth, the idea that we can move forward as humans, as societies, towards a more just future. But without understanding all those different levels, I think we can't, it's almost impossible to move forward.
I think I already tackled this partly in my presentation when I said that how we approach to, is this okay? That this approach, so we started working and we still operate in this very complex political and administrative environment. So we have 3-member presidency. We have educational system and everything divided by 3, which is 3 main ethnic groups. So if you start speaking about 3 main narratives that don't have anything in common, of course it's difficult to move on. So we decided to take this, I mean, it's not that we are trying to find a common ground at all costs. Of course, we still very much stay firm with the fact that I said determined by the international courts and other bodies whose job was to do so. But we started thinking how to use all this in a constructive way, how to create dialogue, how to move on. And I think starting from experiences of children is a very suitable start for reconciliation and for to contribute to healing of a society. I mean, of course, museums have a limited role in these reconciliation processes, because it's not the museum that should lead this process in a society. There are so many different institutions and actors that should do their part of the work, but certainly museums can and should contribute. Thank you.
If only museums could lead the
Yeah.
process.
My turn. I'm going to speak from my personal view here. Sorry. Is this? Yeah, here. I don't subscribe to the concept of reconciliation. Certainly don't seek to do that through the project. And I would say that most of my contributors agree with me on this. I mean, of course, I think it is possible to reconcile, and one should reconcile, but the problem is that the concept of reconciliation has been kidnapped by the other side, the side that doesn't want to acknowledge that there were violations of human rights and so on, and reconciliation for them means let's just put a lid on it and that's it. But I'm more interested in the concept of moral reparation, and I think the project has been effective in acknowledging survivors' stories, and the format allows that. And I have received sufficient evidence to claim that we have contributed to that, and also expanding the memory well beyond the immediate circle of survivors and the families. So that I think that's one of the most important goals.
And maybe latching on to that, I was wondering if you see this as a way of reclaiming the agency and positioning the individual in a certain way.
Absolutely. I mean, there has been a shift in recent years, probably around the time when Pinochet was arrested in London. I was there when I actually moved to London the year when Pinochet was arrested. So the shift of giving testimony. So until more or less that time, the only testimonies that were considered important were those that would shed light on criminal cases, mostly resulting in disappearances and execution. And so there was a quite general idea that your own personal story wasn't that important unless you could contribute to a judicial case.
And Linda, you previously mentioned in conversation that while your network of organizations, obviously all of them are stemming from the individual story, right?
Yeah, we really believe that individual stories that sometimes in our transitional justice work are used for legal processes, but in most cases they are the kind of the same as both my colleagues here, right? Those stories are the material from which you shape a new future, I think, and I think sometimes I have a fair amount of experience in parts of the former Soviet Union, and one of the things I was always struck by in post-Soviet museums is the idea that in still Soviet museums in lots of places, that individuals are never, ever present. You know, when you visit the Museum of the Great Patriotic War in Kyiv, there's no one you can meet other than just a giant maw of people fed into the war machine. And so, to me, these individual stories are the place that really begin to raise questions, that really, deepen our understanding. And so, yeah, we virtually all of our members start with those personal narratives. They all start in different kinds of ways with those narratives, but that's where they all start.
I mean, I don't know if you have anything to and obviously, but being exposed to these individual stories also means that there's a lot of like caretaking that you need to do, not only with these people, but also yourself. So I was wondering if we could perhaps discuss the well-being of your organizations and of your projects, but also you as human beings when dealing with this work. I'm sorry, I have my back to you.
So I can tell you that the way we approach this, so we were luckily on time. We understood that this is very tricky, slippery road for all people that are involved in the research process, and also for the visitors and participants, those who donated their objects, because it is a crowdsourced collection. So we partnered with the Association of Psychologists, who did a training for all the researchers and all our team, like how to protect ourselves, not to be re-traumatized in the process. We also made sure that, as I think I also mentioned that our exhibition is not triggered for some traumas for children or adults who had or had not experienced war, but due to some other reason, emotional predispositions and other factors. And so this, I think, was a very, very good decision and really important. And still from time to time we have debriefings with this team of psychologists as a team, and we also invite them to see the exhibition. We tell them a bit about the reactions of our visitors. So we really are investing a lot of effort in keeping us and visitors safe.
Go ahead.
Yeah, okay. I also work with.
I think
you are.
yeah.
No.
One more.
Try now.
Yeah. I also work from time to time with psychologists in different ways. So, for instance, from time to time, people who want to donate share their stories. Sometimes it's very difficult to deal with particular people. So sometimes I need help for dealing with people who seem to be particularly troubled by revisiting these stories. I also have a very critical advisory board. Who that includes ex-political prisoners. So sometimes I need help for editing certain testimonies. Sometimes, I mean, there is quite a lot of liaising between myself and testimony givers. Sometimes I think people write things or say things without being conscious that this is going to be published widely. So sometimes you need to go back to them and ask them, are you completely sure you want this to be public? And sometimes we have oh, maybe not. And in terms of how do I care of myself, well, that's a long story. I mean, that's a long story. I mean, my personal link with the topic is my parents. Both my parents were had a tour from different detention centers. So in a way, was finding out what happened. So it's been illuminating for me. So I know quite well the population of ex-political prisoners and also children. This is my territory. So I know what are the things that you can say, what are the things you cannot say. So yeah, I think it's more about, so the self-care is more about knowing yourself really well and knowing who you are dealing with very well as well.
So, okay, do I need to press it one more time?
I think you're fine.
Yeah?
It was
principal.
Oh.
principal.
Okay, one was, yeah.
There's a light when it's, yeah.
Oh, okay. So I'm in a slightly different situation than Amina and Katia because my story is not a story that the same way they have personal stories. So part of, I think, for me and many of us at the coalition, self-care is in part being really good listeners to other people, right? And to really understand the courage and strength that the people we work with bring to it. And I'll be honest, and this is going to sound really weird to say, I continue to think, even about topics as challenging and as hard as these, that you need to find a way to have a sense of humor and joy in your work and with the people you work with. And I will say, if you could have seen the three of us in the hammam today, you would understand. But
Which
that,
I unfortunately missed.
yes, sadly, we did not bring our moderator with us. But that, right, this is work about humans. And there's joy in that work, even when it's really hard.